Marcus had always lived quietly, far from the noise and pride of the people he once went to school with. Years had passed since graduation, yet memories of that time still rested in the corners of his mind. Memories of being the boy who had less than everyone else, the boy who was whispered about, the boy who walked home instead of riding in his parents' shiny cars. Now, as a grown man in his late 30s, those classmates no longer crossed his mind. He had built his own world, one where his focus was on his son and the life he promised to give him. But life has a strange way of circling back. One warm afternoon, while Marcus sat at his small kitchen table sorting through a pile of mail, an envelope caught his attention. It was thick, gold-lined, and addressed in handwriting he vaguely recognized. He turned it over in his rough hands, wondering who could be writing him with such formality. Inside was a card engraved with elegant letters. "You are cordially invited to the class reunion gala. Location: the Grand Regency Ballroom. Dress code: formal. Time: 7 p.m. sharp." Marcus stared at the invitation longer than he meant to. He had not thought of his old classmates in years. The very people who once mocked him for being poor, for not having two parents at home, for wearing second-hand clothes. He remembered the laughter in the hallways, the cruel nicknames, the feeling of standing alone while others shined in the glow of their privilege. At first, he thought of ignoring the invitation. Why would he subject himself to that crowd again? But then a thought stirred inside him. What if they expected him to hide? What if they believed he was still the boy who had nothing, the boy they could crush with their arrogance? Slowly, Marcus placed the card back on the table. He felt no anger, only a strange, calm resolve. That evening, he told his son Isaiah about it. Isaiah, just 13, looked up at his father with wide, curious eyes. "Are you going to go, Dad?" he asked. Marcus smiled faintly. "I am not sure yet. They were not kind to me back then." "But you are not the same person anymore," Isaiah said softly, "and they do not know that." The boy's words echoed in Marcus's chest. He realized Isaiah was right. For years, Marcus had worked tirelessly, building a business from nothing, investing every spare dollar, turning hardship into a ladder that led him higher and higher. On the outside, he still appeared simple. He wore plain shirts, drove an old car, lived in a modest house, but his reality was far from what anyone imagined. His company was worth more than he ever dreamed, and he had reached a level of success those classmates could not begin to guess. As the day of the reunion approached, Marcus could not shake the feeling that the invitation had not been sent with kindness. Deep down, he knew the tone of those people, the way they thought, the way they acted. They had not changed, not really. They would still see him as the boy from the struggling home, the boy with too many responsibilities, the one easy to laugh at. On the evening of the event, Marcus stood before the mirror. He could have chosen a sharp-tailored suit. He could have arrived in a luxury car. He could have walked into that ballroom dripping in the kind of wealth his classmates worshipped. But instead, he chose simplicity. A plain gray shirt, the same kind he wore most days. Clean, neat jeans. Shoes without shine. He wanted to walk into that room exactly as himself, not as an image built to impress. The Grand Regency Ballroom was everything the invitation promised. Chandeliers sparkled like falling stars. Music floated softly from a live orchestra, and the air carried the sharp scent of perfume and expensive drinks. Marcus stepped inside, and at once the room quieted for a moment. Heads turned. Eyes studied him. He felt the weight of their stares, the curiosity, the disbelief. Some smiled, but not kindly. A group of men in tuxedos exchanged smirks. A cluster of women in glittering gowns whispered behind their hands. One of them muttered just loud enough, "Look who actually came." Laughter followed, soft but sharp like glass-cutting skin. Marcus walked further in, calm and steady. He found a seat near the edge of the hall, away from the brightest lights. From there, he watched as the evening unfolded. Waiters serving champagne, old classmates boasting about careers, houses, vacations. Every laugh seemed louder than it needed to be. Every story stretched longer than the truth. Before long, someone approached him. It was Daniel, one of the loudest voices from his school days, the one who had given Marcus some of his cruelest nicknames. Daniel wore a suit that looked like it cost more than most families made in a month. He grinned, but the grin was more of a sneer. "Well, look who decided to show up," Daniel said. "Still keeping it casual, I see. Could not rent a tux, huh?" Marcus met his eyes without flinching. "Good to see you too, Daniel." Daniel chuckled, then turned to those nearby. See, some things never change. Laughter rose again, but Marcus stayed silent. He did not feel the sting this time. Instead, he thought of Isaiah's words. They do not know who you are now. As the night went on, more people stopped by his table. Some pretended to be polite, asking shallow questions about his life, his work, his home. Others were less subtle, openly mocking his simplicity. Marcus answered briefly without giving details. He did not need their approval. He had long ago stopped measuring his worth by their opinions. Yet deep inside he sensed their plan. The invitation was not meant to reunite or reconnect. It was meant to display power, to remind him of where they thought he belonged. A spectacle where he was cast as the outsider, the one to be laughed at, the symbol of failure in their glittering world. But Marcus had walked into the lion's den with his head held high, not to prove himself but to stand in his truth. The night was only beginning, and though they thought they held the stage, they would soon learn that the man they mocked was not the boy they remembered. For now, he sat quietly, listening to the hum of arrogance in the room, patient as always, waiting for the moment when silence would fall and everything they believed about him would crumble. Marcus stepped further into the ballroom, and the grand chandeliers above seemed to cast their glow on everyone but him. The air felt heavy, filled with perfume and the sharp smell of expensive wine. The marble floor beneath his shoes reflected the glitter of gowns and the polished shine of black tuxedos. He noticed the way people held their glasses delicately, the way they laughed just a little too loud, and how every smile was carefully measured as if the entire evening was a silent competition. For them, this reunion was not about memories but about ranking who had won at life. Marcus moved slowly across the floor, his eyes taking in the faces that had once been so familiar. Some had aged, lines touching the corners of their eyes, hair streaked with gray. Others carried themselves with the same arrogance he remembered from their teenage years, only now dressed in finer clothes. A few glanced his way and gave polite nods, but their eyes told a different story. They were surprised he had come, perhaps even disappointed. They had expected him to stay away, to avoid walking into a place where he would stand out for all the wrong reasons. He chose a quiet corner, a spot near one of the tall windows that overlooked the city lights. He could see his reflection in the glass. Plain gray shirt, steady expression, nothing that matched the glamour around him. He did not mind. He had not come to blend in. He had come to see what these people had become, to see if time had softened them or if they remained the same. The laughter of a group nearby pulled his attention. They were gathered around a tall man with a wide smile hanging on his every word. Marcus recognized him instantly. It was Peter, once the captain of the football team, the one who had led chants against him in the school cafeteria. Now Peter was boasting about a business deal he had closed, throwing numbers around like confetti. The group around him laughed and clapped as though every word was a triumph. When Peter's eyes met Marcus's across the room, his smile faltered for just a second before twisting into something smug. He excused himself from the group and walked over, his glass of wine swaying slightly in his hand. "Well, Marcus," Peter said loudly enough for others nearby to hear. "I almost didn't recognize you. Still keeping it simple, huh? No suit, no tie? You do know this is a gala, right?" Marcus looked at him calmly. "I read the invitation. I came as myself," Peter chuckled, shaking his head. "Always the odd one out? Some things never change." The words were meant as a dismissal, but Marcus did not react. Silence was his strength. He had learned long ago that not every insult needed an answer, and often silence cut deeper than any reply. As Peter returned to his group, another face appeared. Vanessa, who had once been the queen of every school dance, the one whose words could turn the crowd against anyone she chose. She wore a red gown that glittered under the lights, her posture tall and commanding. She walked up to Marcus with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Marcus," she said sweetly, "it's been such a long time. I'm surprised you decided to come." "Surprised?" Marcus asked quietly. "Well," Vanessa tilted her head, "these kinds of events aren't really for everyone, but it's nice you're here. It shows courage." Marcus almost smiled. He could hear the hidden meaning in her words. To her, his presence was bravery because he did not belong. She expected him to feel small among them, to see himself as less. "I came because I was invited," Marcus said evenly. Vanessa gave a little laugh and placed her hand on his arm as though offering kindness, but it felt more like pity. "I hope you're doing okay. Life can be challenging when you don't have the same opportunities as others. He met her gaze, steady and unflinching. Life has been more than okay. She did not know how to respond, and for a brief moment her smile faltered. Then she excused herself, gliding back into the crowd where whispers began almost immediately. Marcus knew they were talking about him. Every glance in his direction was sharp, every chuckle a blade. They thought they knew his story. They thought he was still the boy who struggled, the boy who carried shame. As the evening went on, the host took the stage to welcome everyone. Glasses clinked, applause echoed through the ballroom, and a slideshow of old photographs from their school years lit up the screen. Laughter filled the room as old memories came alive. Football games, prom nights, class trips. But when a photo of Marcus appeared, standing awkwardly in an oversized shirt with a tired smile, the laughter grew louder. Someone shouted from the crowd, "There's our star!" and the room erupted. Marcus sat still, his jaw tightening but his face calm. He remembered that photo well. It was taken on a day he had come straight from work, too tired to care about how he looked, but determined to be present in the yearbook. At the time, it had embarrassed him deeply. Now, looking at it again, he saw something else. He saw a boy who refused to quit, a boy who carried more weight than most but still showed up. To him, that picture was no longer shame. It was proof of survival. The crowd's laughter faded into more conversations, but Marcus stayed quiet. He sipped his water, listening. He caught fragments of conversations about vacations in Italy, promotions in law firms, expensive cars. Everything was measured. Everything was a performance. He wondered if any of them were truly happy, or if they were still competing with each other, trapped in the same race they had started in high school. Hours passed, and the arrogance in the room thickened. Marcus became the silent target of more jokes, some subtle, others sharp. People asked about his job, his home, his car. They wanted to confirm their assumptions, to cement the idea that he had not risen above them. But Marcus never gave them the satisfaction of shame. His answers were short, his eyes calm. He knew the truth of his life, and that truth needed no decoration. Deep inside, he thought of Isaiah. Every cruel laugh, every arrogant remark, reminded him of the promise he had made to his son, that he would build a life where Isaiah never had to feel the smallness he once felt. That promise had carried him through endless nights of work, through failure and setbacks, through hunger and exhaustion. That promise had given him the strength to rise when everything told him he could not. As the music slowed and couples moved to the dance floor, Marcus stayed seated watching. He was no longer the boy they mocked, but he realized something important. They did not know that yet. To them, he was still the outsider, still the symbol of failure. They had no idea that the man sitting quietly in a gray shirt had built something larger than any of their boasts. Marcus took a deep breath and leaned back in his chair. The night was far from over. The cruel games of his classmates were only just beginning, but so was something else. Soon the very room that laughed at him would fall silent, and the truth they never expected would rise before their eyes. And when that moment came, Marcus would not need to shout or boast. His presence alone would tell the story. Marcus remained in his corner as the night continued, the sounds of laughter rising and falling around him like waves on a shore. He had grown used to silence, to being the man in the background, the one people overlooked. But here, in this ballroom glittering with chandeliers and diamonds, the silence was not neutral. It was heavy, filled with judgment. He could feel the eyes on him as though the entire gathering had agreed that he was the evening's entertainment, the one they could look at and remind themselves of how far above him they had climbed. He sipped his water slowly, steady as always, while waiting for what he knew would come. It did not take long. It began with whispers, small at first, then louder. A few people passed by his table and leaned over with forced smiles. "Marcus, right? How's life treating you?" they asked, their tone dripping with insincerity. Before he could answer, they were already laughing, shaking their heads, moving on to their groups. Another pair of men in tuxedos came over, one pretending to squint at him. "Did you get lost? Thought this was a reunion, not a job fair." Their laughter echoed across the room, and Marcus caught the sound of others joining in. He did not move, his expression unchanging. Then came the sharper cuts. A woman in a silver dress approached with her husband at her side. She looked Marcus up and down and smirked. "So, she said loudly enough for several people to hear. Are you still... What was it? Cleaning floors, right? I remember you had all those little jobs in school. So dedicated, so hardworking. Her words were coated with sugar, but the sting beneath them was clear. Her husband chuckled as though she had said something clever. Marcus looked at her, his gaze steady, and answered only, I did what I had to do. She blinked, her smirk faltering for just a moment before she turned away, shaking her head as though dismissing him. The room seemed to grow bolder with every jab. Marcus realized quickly that the reunion was no gathering of old friends. It was a stage built for arrogance. Every man and woman there carried their success like armor, showing it off in expensive clothes, jewelry, and stories of careers and vacations. And he, the one who did not glitter, the one who came as himself, was the perfect target. They wanted to remind him and themselves that he did not belong. At one point, Daniel, the old class clown who now wore his arrogance like a crown, clinked his glass loudly to draw attention. Ladies and gentlemen, he said with a wide grin, do you all remember Marcus? Our old friend Marcus? The room turned toward him, and Marcus felt dozens of eyes lock onto him at once. Daniel continued, I think it's only fair that we give him a round of applause for showing up tonight. It takes real courage to come in here looking like that. Some things never change, huh? Laughter erupted. The chandeliers above sparkled. But for Marcus, the moment felt like the same cafeteria years ago where he had once stood while the crowd jeered. But Marcus was no longer that boy. He felt no shame. He did not flinch, did not look away. He let their laughter fill the air, and when it faded, he raised his glass of water slightly as if offering a silent toast. His calm unsettled them, though they did not yet understand why. The host of the event eventually took the microphone again, calling for a round of shared memories. People stepped forward, telling stories of school trips, dances, and pranks. But when Marcus's name came up in those stories, it was always framed as a joke. Remember how Marcus showed up late to prom because he had a shift at the gas station? One man said, and the room roared with laughter. Another chimed in, and how about the time he fell asleep in class because he was working nights? Always so tired, our Marcus. Again, laughter filled the ballroom, a sea of voices relishing in memories that were wounds to him but entertainment to them. Marcus listened quietly, but in his mind those memories played differently. He remembered the long nights stocking shelves, his hands aching and then walking into class with burning eyes. He remembered the humiliation of wearing the same clothes too many times because he could not afford more. He remembered the whispers, the jokes, the way teachers looked at him with pity. But he also remembered the reason behind it all. His son Isaiah, small and helpless, depending on him. Every sacrifice had been for that child. Every insult had been endured because he had no choice but to push forward. They mocked the evidence of his struggle, but to Marcus those moments were proof of his strength. At one point, a young woman approached him, softer in demeanor than the rest. Her name was Claire, someone who had never been cruel to him back then, though she had never defended him either. She sat across from him and lowered her voice. I am sorry about the way they're treating you, she said. It's not fair. Marcus looked at her with calm eyes. Fairness isn't something I expect from them, he said. She hesitated before asking, So, what do you do now, if you don't mind me asking? He paused, considering. For years he had built his success quietly, deliberately keeping it away from the eyes of those who once mocked him. He preferred it that way. To speak of it felt like boasting, and Marcus had no desire to boast. But he also understood that sooner or later, the truth would have to surface. I run a business, he said simply. It's grown more than I imagined. Her eyes softened with curiosity, but before she could ask more, Daniel returned, interrupting with his booming voice. Careful, Claire, or he'll tell you about his lawn mowing service. Maybe he'll even offer you a discount. The crowd nearby exploded with laughter again. Claire looked down, embarrassed, but Marcus remained unmoved. His silence frustrated Daniel, who thrived on reactions. By now the night had become a performance of mockery. Every time Marcus's name was mentioned, it was followed by laughter. Every glance his way was laced with arrogance. And yet, as the hours passed, Marcus found himself strangely at peace. He understood something that none of them did. His worth was no longer tied to their approval, and their cruelty no longer had power over him. They were laughing at a ghost, a memory of who he once was, while the man sitting before them had already surpassed them in ways they could not comprehend. The moment of revelation had not yet come, but Marcus knew it was drawing closer. The more they mocked, the heavier the silence would fall when the truth emerged. He could sense it building like a storm on the horizon. For now he let them laugh, let them cling to their illusions, because when the truth arrived it would not need anger or revenge. It would arrive with quiet dignity, and it would turn their arrogance into shame. So Marcus sat still, the calm in the storm, while the ballroom roared with laughter at his expense. He was their joke, their symbol of failure, but only for this moment. Soon the balance would shift, and the man they thought was beneath them would stand taller than any of their golden chandeliers. Marcus sat in his chair, the noise of the ballroom fading into the background as his mind wandered back to the years that had shaped him. The laughter of his classmates swirled around the grand room. But for Marcus, another kind of memory played in silence. One filled not with chandeliers and champagne, but with sleepless nights and endless sacrifice. Every insult thrown his way tonight reminded him of the long road he had walked to reach this moment. He remembered the small apartment he once lived in, a single room barely big enough for a bed, a crib, and a table that wobbled whenever he set down a cup. He had been barely 20 when Isaiah was born, a young man still figuring out life, suddenly faced with the crushing weight of fatherhood. His partner had left soon after the birth, unwilling to carry the responsibility. Marcus had been left alone with a tiny child who depended on him for everything. He remembered holding Isaiah in his arms, the baby's tiny fists clutching at his shirt, and feeling a fear so deep it nearly broke him. He had no money, no guidance, only the determination that this child would not suffer because of the choices others had made. He worked anywhere he could find work. By day he hauled boxes in warehouses, his back aching from lifting more weight than his body wanted to carry. At night he stocked shelves at grocery stores, pushing carts of goods until his hands blistered. When those shifts ended, he grabbed a few hours of rest before taking on small jobs, cleaning offices, mowing lawns, fixing leaky sinks. There were days he walked miles to reach each job, his shoes worn thin, his stomach empty. But he kept moving because stopping was not an option. Every dollar went to rent, food, and baby formula. There were nights when Isaiah cried with hunger and Marcus had nothing left to give. He remembered sitting in the dark, rocking his son and whispering promises that things would get better, even when he did not know how. Sometimes he went without food so Isaiah could eat. Sometimes he slept on the floor because he had sold his mattress to cover bills. The weight of responsibility pressed against his chest like a stone, but still he refused to collapse under it. Education had always been important to Marcus, but with so many jobs and a child to raise, it seemed impossible. Still, he forced himself to attend night classes, reading business textbooks under the dim glow of a single lamp while Isaiah slept beside him. He would underline words with a shaky hand, exhaustion pulling at his eyes, yet he pushed through because knowledge was his way out. He learned about investing, about entrepreneurship, about how small ideas could grow into something larger. Slowly, the seeds of possibility began to plant themselves in his mind. The turning point came one evening when Marcus took a risk. He used the small savings he had scraped together from years of hard work and started a tiny cleaning service just himself at first, offering to scrub floors, wash windows, and handle the jobs others did not want. He printed flyers on cheap paper and walked from door to door, slipping them into mailboxes and posting them on boards. At first, the phone barely rang, but eventually one client turned into two and two into five. Marcus treated every job as though he were cleaning his own home, careful and thorough, and word began to spread. Soon he was hiring others, men and women like him who needed second chances. The business grew, but growth did not come easy. There were months when bills outweighed earnings, times when clients disappeared without paying, moments when Marcus thought of giving up. But each time doubt crept in, he looked at Isaiah's face and remembered the promise he had whispered in the dark, that his son would never feel abandoned, that he would always have someone fighting for him. That promise pulled Marcus through every failure until success finally began to take shape. With careful planning and relentless work, Marcus expanded beyond cleaning. He moved into property maintenance, then construction, then real estate investment. He reinvested every dollar, living simply while building something stronger brick by brick. The small company that began with one man scrubbing floors turned into a corporation that employed hundreds. Years of sacrifice had forged him into a leader, not through privilege or connections, but through resilience and persistence, and now, sitting in that ballroom surrounded by arrogant classmates, Marcus knew something they could not comprehend. Their laughter tonight echoed the same cruelty he had endured years ago, but it no longer pierced him. Those years of struggle had carved strength into him that their privilege never required of them. They had mocked his worn clothes, his tired eyes, his endless work, but those very things had built the foundation of his empire. As another toast was raised across the room, Marcus leaned back and let his memories wash over him. He thought of the nights he had spent walking home under flickering streetlights, clutching his pay envelope and praying it would be enough. He thought of the mornings when Isaiah's laughter gave him strength after only 2 hours of sleep. He thought of the countless times he'd been told he would never succeed, that people like him were meant to stay at the bottom. And yet here he was, the quiet man in a plain shirt, carrying more success in silence than any of them shouted in arrogance. He looked around the room at the glittering gowns, the polished shoes, the men puffing their chests as they boasted about promotions. None of them knew the truth of his journey. None of them could imagine the nights he had faced hunger, the mornings he had faced doubt, the years he had endured ridicule. And none of them knew that behind his calm eyes was the power of a man who had already won a battle greater than any of them would ever fight. The memories of struggle were not chains to Marcus. They were proof that he had survived when the world wanted him to fail, proof that he had risen when everyone laughed at the thought of it. And in that ballroom, surrounded by arrogance, Marcus felt something unexpected. Gratitude. Gratitude for the hardships that had shaped him. Gratitude for the strength he had earned. Gratitude for the boy he once was who refused to give up. The laughter of his classmates grew louder again. Another joke tossed his way, another round of mocking glances. But Marcus only smiled faintly to himself. They thought they were mocking his past, but in truth they were celebrating it without knowing. Every cruel word was a reminder of how far he had come, of how much he had endured, and of the victory waiting quietly in his silence. The night was not over. The moment of revelation had not yet arrived, but as Marcus sat with his memories, he knew it was coming. And when it did, it would not be loud or dramatic. It would be simple, powerful, undeniable, like the man he had become. The ballroom was now at its loudest, music echoing, voices bouncing from every wall, glasses clinking with every toast. People had loosened their ties and let their laughter grow bigger with every passing hour. The air was thick with perfume, wine, and arrogance. Marcus still sat in his chair near the edge of the room, watching it all with quiet eyes. He was the only one who did not join the dance floor, the only one without champagne in hand, and yet his stillness made him stand out more than the loudest person in the room. By now, the jokes about him had become a kind of entertainment. It was no longer individuals mocking him. It was groups circling back to his table as though they were drawn to the quiet figure who refused to break. One man leaned over and smirked. "Marcus, what's your secret? How do you keep your shirt so plain? I swear I saw the same one in a thrift store on the way here." Another voice chimed in from behind. "Don't be mean, at least he showed up. It takes confidence to sit here when you don't exactly belong." Laughter rippled through the group. Marcus raised his glass of water slightly as if in another silent toast. The gesture unsettled some of them. They could not understand why he was not crumbling under their words. Then came the moment when Daniel, emboldened by wine and ego, grabbed the microphone from the host. His voice rang out over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, can I have your attention? Tonight we celebrate our successes, our achievements, our lives since those old high school days. And what better way to do that than to honor one of our classmates who, well, let's say he has always been unforgettable." The spotlight above shifted, falling onto Marcus. Heads turned, whispers rose, and then Daniel continued, "And please, everyone, a round of applause for Marcus, the man who taught us all how important it is to never aim too high." The room erupted in laughter, clapping mixed with mocking cheers. Marcus stood slowly, his movements calm, almost deliberate. He had not planned to speak tonight, but the silence he carried now needed a voice. He walked to the center of the room, the light following him, and took the microphone from Daniel's hand. Daniel tried to smirk, but something in Marcus's steady gaze made it falter. For a moment, Marcus just stood there, the ballroom buzzing with whispers. He looked around, scanning the faces of people who had once sneered at him in classrooms, who now sneered at him in suits. And then, in a voice low but strong, he said, "You invited me here tonight to laugh at me. You wanted me to feel small, the way I once did in school. You think I am the same boy who wore hand-me-down clothes, who worked nights to survive, who came to class tired. And you are right about one thing, I am that boy. I am him and I carry him with me. But what you do not know is that the very struggle you mocked built the man I am today. The laughter died down, replaced by a heavy silence. Marcus continued, You see simplicity in my clothes and assume failure. You hear nothing about my life and assume emptiness. But the truth is, I stopped needing to prove myself to people like you a long time ago. While you measured life in appearances, I measured mine in promises kept. Promises to my son, to myself, to the boy who refused to give up even when the world wanted him to. A murmur spread through the crowd. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Daniel tried to laugh it off, but Marcus kept going. You ask me what I do now. You mock me with jokes about jobs you think are beneath you. So let me answer clearly. I run a company that started with one man and a broom. That company now employs hundreds. We have contracts across states. And last year its valuation crossed $100 million. The words hit the room like a stone thrown into still water. The silence was deafening. Glasses froze halfway to mouths. Eyes widened. A few people gasped. Marcus stood there, calm as if he had simply stated the weather. He did not smile, did not boast, only let the truth settle over them. Daniel tried to chuckle, but the sound was hollow. You're joking, right? He asked, his voice cracking slightly. Marcus turned to him and said, I do not need to joke. My life is real. The ballroom was now still, the energy drained of arrogance, replaced with disbelief. Vanessa, standing near the front, clutched her glass tighter, her earlier smirk erased. Peter, who had boasted about his business deals all night, stared at Marcus as though seeing him for the first time. The same people who had laughed at his gray shirt and plain shoes now looked at him, with a different kind of attention, confusion mixed with shame. Marcus handed the microphone back to the host and returned to his seat. He did not need to say more. His words had done what silence alone could not. The weight of truth had shifted the room, and suddenly the chandeliers above seemed to shine on him in a new way. Conversations resumed, but they were quieter, more cautious. The mocking had stopped. Instead, people approached his table with hesitant smiles, asking questions not out of cruelty but out of curiosity. So what kind of business is it? One asked carefully. That's impressive, another muttered. Marcus answered briefly, offering no details. He was not there to impress them, only to live in his truth. Isaiah's face flashed in his mind. He wished his son could have seen this moment, the moment when years of struggle revealed themselves not as scars but as proof of victory. He thought of the nights when he whispered promises in the dark. And now here he was, standing in the light, not because of revenge but because perseverance had carried him to a place arrogance could never reach. The night carried on, but the mood had changed. No one laughed at Marcus anymore. No one mocked his shirt or his silence. Instead, they avoided his eyes or looked at him with something that bordered on respect. The power had shifted not because he shouted, not because he boasted, but because he had spoken the simple truth of his life, and the truth had more weight than any of their pride. As the orchestra played another slow song and couples moved to the dance floor, Marcus remained seated, calm as ever. He did not need to dance or drink or boast. He had already said what needed to be said. The moment of revelation had passed, and in its wake, the ballroom felt different. Marcus leaned back in his chair, looking up at the chandeliers one last time. They sparkled like stars, but he knew his light came from somewhere else, from every night of struggle, every morning of sacrifice, every step of the journey that had led him here. And as the music played on, he allowed himself a small, quiet smile. After Marcus spoke, the ballroom changed. It was not just the silence that followed his words, but the way people moved, the way they carried themselves when they realized their laughter had collapsed into shame. Some turned away, unable to meet his eyes. Others tried to mask their discomfort with forced smiles, as though pretending they had never mocked him. The air no longer carried the same confidence. The arrogance that had filled the room had been drained by truth. Marcus sat back at his table, calm as he had been all night. He had not spoken to humiliate anyone, and he had not revealed his success to boast. He had only spoken the truth when pressed beyond silence, and now that the truth had settled in, he felt no need to say more. It was enough. Yet the room could not let go so easily. People who had avoided him for most of the evening now approached one by one. Their tone was different, their words suddenly careful, almost respectful. A man who had earlier joked about his shirt leaned down and said, "I have to admit, Marcus, that's remarkable. I didn't know you'd done so well." Marcus only nodded. He did not feel anger, but he also did not feel the need to ease their discomfort. Vanessa, in her glittering red gown, finally approached. Her eyes no longer carried the sharp gleam of superiority. She hesitated before speaking, her voice softer. "I think I owe you an apology," she said. "We didn't know. We assumed—" Her words trailed off. Marcus looked at her, steady as always. "You assumed I had not changed. You assumed life ended the way it began. But assumptions are heavy things, Vanessa. They weigh more on those who carry them than on those they target." She lowered her gaze, unable to answer. For a moment she looked less like the queen of the room and more like someone who realized her crown was only made of glass. Others gathered too. Peter, once the loud captain, now a businessman whose ego had filled the night, stood awkwardly before Marcus. "You built all that, starting from nothing?" he asked. "Yes," Marcus replied. Peter rubbed the back of his neck. That's something. I guess I underestimated you." Marcus's answer was quiet but firm. "It was not me you underestimated. It was what struggle can build in a person. Privilege gives comfort. Struggle gives strength. You laughed at my struggle, but it shaped me in ways you will never know." Peter nodded faintly, his arrogance stripped away. He muttered a few more words before stepping back into the crowd, his voice no longer the loudest in the room. The music continued to play, but the rhythm of the evening had shifted. No more jokes came Marcus's way. No more whispers carried laughter behind his back. Instead, people spoke in hushed voices, glancing at him as though trying to understand the quiet dignity he carried. Marcus, however, did not care for their opinions anymore. He had long ago stopped needing validation from those who had once mocked him. What mattered to him was not their shock, but the lesson hidden in the night. He knew that his silence had been more powerful than their noise, his composure more piercing than their cruelty. He thought again of Isaiah, his son, who had never known these classmates, who had never seen the cruelty his father endured in school. Isaiah only knew his father as a man who worked hard, who stayed calm, who taught him to face the world with respect even when respect was not given in return. Marcus imagined his son standing there, watching the way he carried himself in this room filled with arrogance. He knew Isaiah would learn something more valuable than wealth, that dignity was a power no one could take away. As the night stretched on, the host tried to lift the atmosphere again, calling for more dancing, more toasts. People complied, but the energy had changed. The arrogance had dimmed, replaced with unease. Marcus remained seated, content in his stillness. He had no desire to join the show of wealth, no interest in competing in stories of vacations and careers. His silence was his statement, and it spoke louder than anything else in the room. Later in the evening, Daniel, the loudest of them all, returned. He no longer carried the same swagger. His face was flushed, and his words stumbled as he tried to speak. "Marcus, listen, you know we were just joking, right? It's all in fun. We didn't mean anything by it." Marcus met his eyes. "Mockery is never just fun to the one being mocked. But I am not angry, Daniel. I moved past anger years ago. You see, dignity is not about how others treat you. It is about how you respond. Tonight you gave me every reason to lower myself, but I will not. I will not, because my son deserves to see a father who does not bend to cruelty." Daniel swallowed hard, unable to respond. He muttered something and walked away, his laughter gone, his arrogance cracked. As the night neared its end, Marcus stood and looked around the room one last time. The chandeliers still sparkled, the music still played, the gowns still glittered, but the energy had shifted completely. He saw shame in faces that once smirked, respect in eyes that once mocked, silence where there had been laughter. He realized then that his greatest triumph was not the revelation of his wealth, but the fact that he had carried himself with dignity throughout it all. He had not shouted. He had not demanded respect. He had not tried to humiliate anyone. He had only stood in his truth, calm and unwavering, and let the weight of his life speak for itself. And that, he realized, was the true victory. Marcus walked toward the exit, his steps steady, his presence commanding without effort. As he reached the door, he glanced back briefly. The ballroom was still filled with lights and music, but for him, it already felt far away, like a place that no longer mattered. He had entered the lion's den and walked out not only unharmed but stronger, carrying a dignity that no laughter could strip away. The night air outside was cool against his face. He breathed deeply, feeling the quiet of the city after the storm of voices. He thought of Isaiah again, of the life they had built together, of the battles won in silence. And as he walked into the night, Marcus knew he had given his son something priceless, not just a future secured by wealth, but an example of what it meant to live with dignity, no matter the world's cruelty. The ballroom had grown quieter as the night edged toward its end. The orchestra played its last songs, and the waiters began collecting empty glasses from tables that had once been filled with noise and pride. Marcus remained seated for a moment longer, watching it all from the same quiet corner where he had spent the evening. Yet everything felt different now. The room that once carried laughter at his expense was now heavy with the weight of his revelation. Faces that had once smirked at him now carried something else: unease, regret, even a kind of reluctant respect. Marcus rose slowly, his plain gray shirt still standing out among sequins and suits. But it no longer looked out of place. If anything, it shone with a meaning none of them could wear on their backs: honesty, resilience, survival. He walked calmly toward the exit, and as he did, he felt the eyes following him. No longer filled with arrogance, but with silence that begged for forgiveness, yet dared not ask. He had no interest in forgiveness tonight. He carried no bitterness, only the satisfaction of knowing that he had faced the storm without bending. The grand doors opened and the cool night air swept in. It was crisp, clean, and full of life, a sharp contrast to the heavy air of perfume and wine inside. Marcus stepped out onto the marble steps and looked up at the sky. The stars above shone with the same quiet persistence he carried within himself. For the first time all night he let out a long breath, one that carried the weight of years of struggle, of hunger, of sacrifice, of silence. He was free of it now, not because the struggle had disappeared, but because he had proven even to himself that every moment of it had been worth it. Waiting at the curb was Isaiah. The boy's face lit up when he saw his father emerge, and Marcus's heart swelled with a pride deeper than any applause. Isaiah hurried to him, his eyes full of questions. "How was it, Dad? Did they treat you badly?" Marcus looked down at his son, his expression calm. "They tried," he said softly. "But it does not matter. What matters is that I stood as myself." Isaiah studied him with wide eyes. "Did you tell them who you are now?" Marcus placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. "I told them enough. But I did not go there to prove anything to them. I went to show myself and to show you that dignity does not need permission. It does not come from their acceptance. It comes from within." The boy nodded slowly as though trying to understand the weight of those words. Marcus knew that one day he would. That was why this night mattered, not because of the classmates who mocked him, but because of the lesson it gave his son. They began walking down the quiet street, the glow of the ballroom fading behind them. Marcus's steps were steady, his shoulders relaxed. For years he had carried the memory of humiliation, of being the boy others laughed at, the boy who did not belong. Tonight he had faced those same voices, and instead of shrinking, he had stood tall. He had not fought them with anger or revenge. He had fought them with truth, and truth had won. As they walked, Isaiah spoke again. "Were they surprised, Dad?" Marcus smiled faintly. "Yes, they were very surprised. But that is not the point. The point is that people can laugh at you. They can doubt you. They can try to push you down, but they cannot define you unless you let them. I did not let them then, and I do not let them now." The boy nodded firmly this time, his young face glowing with pride. Marcus felt his chest tighten with emotion. In that moment, he realized that all the wealth he had built, all the success he had achieved, was not as valuable as this: the chance to show his son that true victory was not measured by money, but by how a man carries himself through life's storms. They reached their car, the same modest one Marcus always drove despite his wealth. Isaiah looked at it, then back at the ballroom in the distance. "They probably thought you would show up in something fancy," he said with a small grin. Marcus chuckled softly. "Maybe, but we do not live to meet other people's expectations. We live to meet our own." He opened the car door for his son, and as they settled inside, Marcus felt a deep peace wash over him. The night had been long, but it had ended exactly as it was meant to, not with fireworks or applause, but with quiet triumph. Driving through the city streets, Marcus thought of the journey that had brought him here. He thought of the nights he had gone hungry so Isaiah could eat, of the jobs he had worked until his body ached, of the books he had studied by dim light. He thought of the countless times he had been laughed at, doubted, ignored. And then he thought of this moment, driving home with his son by his side, his dignity intact, his truth revealed. Every sacrifice had led to this. Every hardship had been worth it. As the city lights blurred past, Isaiah leaned his head against the window and whispered, "I'm proud of you, Dad." Marcus glanced at him, his heart full. "I'm proud of you too, son. You're the reason I never gave up." Silence settled between them, but it was not the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of peace, of understanding, of victory. Back at home, Marcus parked the car and stepped out, the cool night air wrapping around him once more. He looked up at the stars again, brighter now in the quiet of the neighborhood. He thought of the classmates still inside the ballroom, trapped in their competition, measuring their lives against each other. He felt no envy for them. He felt no need to return. His triumph was not theirs to understand. It belonged only to him and to the boy who stood beside him. As he walked into his home, Marcus realized something powerful. The night had not been about wealth or success. It had not been about proving himself to those who doubted him. It had been about dignity, about walking into a place meant to humiliate him and leaving with his head held high. He had not needed to shout, to boast, or to strike back. He had simply been himself, and that had been enough. For Marcus, that was the true victory. Not the money, not the company, not the applause of strangers, but the knowledge that he had kept his promise to never break, to never surrender, to always rise. And as he closed the door behind him, shutting out the noise of the world, Marcus knew this was the story Isaiah would carry forward. A story not of arrogance but of resilience, not of revenge but of dignity, not of wealth but of character. The night was over, but the lesson would live on. And that was the kind of triumph that would outlast chandeliers, tuxedos, and mocking laughter. It was the triumph of a man who had walked into cruelty and walked away undefeated.